Good evening. We find ourselves once again near the tail end of another long and hard-fought campaign season. You know, every election time, it's said that this election will be the most important in our history. And while that is true for every election, not every election is consequential. For example, 1996 and 2008 were both important elections for their time, but there is no doubt that 2008 was far more consequential than 1996. But let's be clear. The 2024 election is indeed a very consequential election. We did not expect this race to be as it is at the start of 2024. For the past 3.5 years, President Joe Biden has been hard at work for the American people. He passed the American Rescue Plan. He became the first president in decades to sign an infrastructure bill, investing in our infrastructure. He signed the Inflation Reduction Act, the biggest investment in combating climate change. He enacted burn pit benefits for our veterans. Computer chip manufacturing to compete with China. He became the first sitting president to march to the picket line with union workers. He expanded NATO, adding Finland and then Sweden to the alliance. Stood up against Putin's foreign aggression in Ukraine and is working around the clock to bring forth a deal to end the war in the Middle East. He's championed a woman's right to choose, and he's become the first president in decades to move us closer to curbing the heartbreaking epidemic of gun violence in this country. All this and more, in my opinion, and to many Americans, was a winning record. And I look forward to the day when I could cast my vote for Joe Biden one more time to express my thanks and gratitude. But earlier this year, in an act of selflessness, President Biden decided to pass the torch to a new generation in Vice President Kamala Harris, and by extension, he passed the torch to us, the people, entrusting us with charting a new course and determining which course to take for the next 4 years. My friends, let's discuss that choice. For most voters, the economy is a top issue. Many like to claim that over the last 3.5 years, there has been serious economic downturn and that the country is either already in or on the verge of entering a recession. In reality, throughout the past few years, we have recovered from a once-in-a-century pandemic that the Trump administration has bungled. Businesses and schools were reopened, millions of jobs have been created, and under the Biden-Harris administration, the inflation rate is now down to 2.4%, the lowest since February of 2021. In addition, organizations like the World Bank continue to insist that the United States economy is robust and exceptional. Donald Trump wants in his second term to implement hard-hitting tariffs which would jack up prices and create more nightmares at the checkout line, and continue to give tax breaks to the ultra-wealthy, leaving the middle class in the dust. Vice President Harris plans on building an opportunity economy, which lowers prices from everything from groceries to housing. Also, and this is just me speaking in my personal opinion, I don't think we should be taking advice on how to run the economy and finances from a man that's gotten himself $421 million in debt, continues to face legal fees, and continues to grift off by selling everything from watches to sneakers to Bibles. Immigration and the border is another top issue for voters. Recently, you may have heard from conservative news outlets like Fox News or Right Side Broadcasting Network about there being a serious crisis at the southern border. And while there have indeed been many crossings at the border, thanks to actions taken by the Biden-Harris administration this summer, border apprehensions were down by as much as 1/3. Back during the 2022 midterms, Republican and conservative candidates campaigned while campaigning for higher office like the United States House of Representatives and the United States Senate, that if they were elected and were to take back the majority in one or both chambers, that they would work to pass legislation to curb the crisis at the border. The Biden-Harris administration opened up and endorsed bipartisan negotiations towards that end to better the issue at the border. Earlier this year, a bipartisan group of senators, which included James Lankford of Oklahoma, one of the most conservative members of the United States Senate, drafted a bill that would have fixed many of the issues at the border. And when it looked like it was getting praise and possibly had a chance of passing, Donald Trump stepped in. Apparently, to Donald Trump, this would have been a win for the other side. Rather than fixing an important issue, he decided to encourage his Republicans to just hold off and campaign on the problem rather than fixing it. Vice President Harris has a plan to better the situation at the border, and she counts on her record as a prosecutor, a district attorney, and attorney general of a border state, California, to get it done. In June of 2022, the Supreme Court voted 6-3 to overturn Roe v. Wade, setting the stage for over 20 states to implement draconian bans on a woman's right to an abortion. 3 of the Supreme Court justices were appointed by then-President Donald Trump: Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. In many of these states with an abortion ban in place, there are not even exceptions for victims of rape or incest. In the state of Georgia, the bans there have led to the deaths of several women who have suffered from complications and were not able to get the life-saving care they needed in time. That is shameful. I learned 2 years ago that my 5th grade teacher, Miss Cunningham, had gotten a procedure done to save her life due to a botched implantation. Sadly, if her situation occurred now and she found herself in a state with a Trump abortion ban, who knows what could have happened to her. That situation is unacceptable. Donald Trump is being vague, as is his running mate J.D. Vance, flip-flopping about supporting a nationwide abortion ban, about IVF, and about care in general. But if one were to just crack open the Project 2025 playbook, you will see that those likely to be in a second Trump administration would not only support and encourage bans, but they would also advocate for prosecuting doctors who perform life-saving care and advocate for an abortion surveillance system nationwide, eliminating a woman's right to privacy. President Biden and Vice President Harris have repeatedly advocated for the right of women to determine what is best for their bodies, and if elected, Kamala Harris will continue to stand for a nation where the government stays out of the doctor's office and lets women choose instead of those who draft Trump abortion bans. In addition, in several states this year, including in Florida and Arizona, there are referendums on the ballot to ensure the right of women to determine what happens to their bodies. Be sure that you stand up for women's rights this election. One issue that means a lot personally to myself and many communities across this country, including right here in South Florida, is gun violence prevention. On February 14, 2018, 17 people were killed and 17 more were injured at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. Among those taken way too soon was Meadow Pollock, who I remember from middle school as a classmate, and Gina Montalto and Jamie Guttenberg, who I got to know from their time at the Friendship Initiative, now known as the Friendship Journey, a buddy program which pairs volunteers with kids and young adults of all abilities. Gina and Jamie brought smiles to everyone who knew them, and there isn't a day where we forget the love and positivity that they gave to everyone. In the wake of the tragedy, a new movement is initiated to curb the heartbreaking epidemic of gun violence in this country, led by those who were students at Marjory Stoneman Douglas and a tragic club of families and loved ones, like Jamie Guttenberg's father, Fred Guttenberg, who still to this day encourages people to stop listening to the liars, like those in the gun lobby, or those who loudly demand that gun safety activists stack up or shut up, or the politicians like Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, or Rick Scott, who take thousands, if not millions, in donations from organizations like the National Rifle Association, and it shows. When there was a school shooting at Perry High School in Iowa back in January, Donald Trump was campaigning for the Iowa caucuses and said at a rally that we just have to get over it. After another school shooting, this time at Appalachian High School in Winder, Georgia in September, J.D. Vance said that school shootings are essentially a fact of life. Rather than commonsensical solutions by those bought out by the gun lobby, either insist that more guns is the answer or just nothing at all. And if one once again cracks open the Project 2025 playbook, you'll see that more gun safety guardrails would be withdrawn for good. 4 years ago, while running for president and vice president, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris promised that they would act to curb our nation's heartbreaking epidemic of gun violence. Biden met with some of the Parkland families before he ran for president, and when he was late for a speech, he told them while gathered backstage that they mattered more. Joe Biden's empathy and character shone brightly in that moment, his knowledge of what it's like to lose loved ones empowering him to do good. In the wake of a tragic school shooting at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas in May of 2022, there was once again a nationwide yearning for something, anything to be done. That time, fortunately, would be different. After repeated tragedies like in Santa Fe, Aurora, Pittsburgh, and countless others, encouraged by activists and leaders like President Biden and Vice President Harris, the bipartisan Safer Communities Act was passed and soon signed into law in June of 2022. It isn't often that politicians keep such big promises, But President Biden and Vice President Harris kept theirs, and then they continue to keep their promises and continue to do the good work by confirming a permanent head to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. And just last year, President Biden signed an executive order establishing the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention. In her role as part of that office, Vice President Harris toured the 1200 building at Marjory Stoneman Douglas this year to examine and draw up more solutions to protect our communities. Vice President Harris and her running mate, Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, are both gun owners, and even they recognize what the data shows and what more than 80% of Americans support, that commonsensical gun laws are needed, they work, and they save lives. Since Russia launched its aggressive war in Ukraine on February 24, 2022, the United States, under the Biden-Harris administration, has led a steadfast and united NATO alliance in supporting the defense of Ukraine by providing weapons and intelligence. Some have said that we should not be spending so much money on Ukraine and other important allies, but I believe it was former Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley who said it best: "This is a war of freedom." If we do not contribute to Ukraine's defense and the defense of our other allies and unite as a unified alliance, Vladimir Putin may continue to sense weakness and cause even more trouble. Since the attacks on Israel by Hamas on October 7, 2023, the Biden-Harris administration has maintained their support for Israel's right to defend itself and to bring to justice those who were behind these heinous attacks, including Yahya Sinwar just recently, the leader of Hamas. At the same time, the administration and diplomats from several countries have been hard at work around the clock to broker a deal to end the war and free the hostages taken on October 7th. Donald Trump did not recognize as president nor appreciate the power of our alliances, and often was chummy towards authoritarian dictators, including, during the height of the pandemic, sending COVID tests to Vladimir Putin when Americans were dying and struggling to find tests on their own. He said that if NATO allies don't pay enough of their fair share, that Russia should do whatever the hell they want to our NATO allies. Vice President Kamala Harris knows that alliances matter, and that only if we stand united can we stand up against foreign aggression and work towards a more better and just world. On September 17, 1787, Benjamin Franklin was asked what type of government had been crafted upon the creation of our Constitution. He simply smiled and replied, "A republic, if you can keep it." For generations, Americans have always stood to preserve our institutions and to indeed keep our republic. Abraham Lincoln once said in 1838, "If destruction be our lot, we ourselves must be its author and finisher," warning that unruly mobs who disregarded the laws and institutions of the United States could cause significant, if not irreparable, damage. From September through November of 2020, including through the election that year, Donald Trump began spreading a big lie that the election would be stolen, and after he lost the election in both the Electoral College and popular vote, he continued to insist that it was stolen. His Republican Department of Justice looked for any evidence of substantial fraud that could flip back swing states to his column. When no such evidence was found, Trump and his closest allies continued to spread the big lie, leading to threats being made against poll workers, calls to states asking them to find thousands of votes, and Trump roiling up his base, saying that they should fight back and take their country back. All of this snowballed into the insurrection against Congress's constitutionally required duty to certify the electoral votes on January 6, 2021, leading to hundreds of injuries, including 174 police officers, as well as 6 people losing their lives. Trump has since called this heinous moment in our history a day of love, and he would likely pardon those convicted of storming the Capitol. Furthermore, Project 2025 will ensure that our system of checks and balances will no longer get in the way of a second Trump administration, implementing the unitary executive theory, giving the president virtually unchecked power. This election will be the first presidential election since January 6, 2021. And Trump's authoritarian behavior has led to hundreds of former Republican officials and conservatives, from Adam Kinzinger to Dick and Liz Cheney, rallying to support Vice President Kamala Harris, not because they agree with her on every issue, but because she will stand for our republic. And if there's room in the big tent for them, there is room in this big tent for you. I have previously written about how earlier in my life I considered to lean more conservatively than I do today. Like many of us, as we grow older, our views may change, and that's all right. I am now a member of the Democratic Party and tend to lean liberally in my politics. But despite that position, I am friends and family with liberals, conservatives, Democrats, Republicans, independents, you name it, and I respect their opinions. It's what makes us so great as Americans, that we can disagree on the issues but still come together and love each other. I also said earlier that Vice President Kamala Harris has assembled a big tent to support her, from progressives to liberals to moderates, and yes, even concerned conservatives like the Cheneys, Adam Kinzinger, Jeff Duncan, and so many others. Hundreds of officials, some of which even worked for the Trump administration, all concerned with one thing. We are a nation of laws, and it is important that the President of the United States not only uphold those laws, but abide by them. And unfortunately, Donald Trump does not have much respect for our laws. We saw such when he roiled up an insurrection on January 6, 2021, and we've also seen it when he committed other crimes. In 2016, he instructed Michael Cohen to ensure a hush money payment to cover up an extramarital affair in order to make sure that the story didn't get out so that he could win the 2016 election. After he lost the 2020 election, he, Rudy Giuliani, and other key allies pressured poll workers and state officials, some even being threatened, in order to reverse the results so that Trump would be happy, despite the will of the people saying otherwise. And when Trump left office, he took with him classified documents in a violation of the Presidential Records Act. In addition, Donald Trump has had disdain for his fellow Americans who disagree with him, from journalists to protesters to late-night talk show hosts, calling many of them the enemy from within, threatening to use the Insurrection Act and other means to impose his will. These are not the words and actions of a President of the United States who would uphold our democratic institutions. They are the words and measures of an authoritarian. And it's also time that the Republicans stop hiding behind a cloak, stop clutching their pearls whenever we point this out. They always demand that we tone down the rhetoric. If they were serious about toning down the rhetoric, then how about this for a start? Donald Trump was almost taken twice by assassination, and assassinations are never okay. If they were actually serious with toning down the rhetoric, they would reconvene Congress right now and pass initiatives to curb gun violence, for example. I would love to see something like the Donald John Trump Violence Prevention Act pass in Congress. But until that day comes, we need to call balls and strikes where they are needed to be called. My friends, we must stand for the rule of law, and we must stand for Kamala Harris. You may not agree with her on every issue, but she will preserve, protect, and defend our Constitution and our laws, and that is way more important than party preference. Ultimately, this election will be a choice on character. Character matters a great deal. It matters about the character of our nation, what we shall represent, and the character of who we wish to elevate to our nation's highest office for the next 4 years. And between our two major tickets, there is a great choice between characters. One is of decency and kindness, of being a president for all Americans, of building people up rather than knocking them down, and governing for every single citizen, whether it be Democratic, Republican, or Independent, coming together as a unified and broad coalition for the betterment of a more perfect union, sticking with our institutions, and representing decency and empathy. The other is a character of reactionary populism, of extremism, retribution, revenge, tearing people apart, dividing people, politicizing everything from hurricanes to tragedies to everything you can think of, and ripping away at our institutions. My friends, the choice of character, the choice for this election cannot be more clear. And I know which decision I have made. I know which choice I have chosen. I know which candidate I have voted for. I have voted for the candidacy of decency and kindness, of unity, and of bringing people together. I voted for Vice President Kamala Harris. And I did so by following an important piece of advice. I have long admired the Friendship Journey's unofficial anthem, Look for the Good by Jason Mraz, with the following lyrics. It may seem impossible until it's done. Look for the good in everyone. We have assessed our choices in this election, in these closing arguments, and we have found the good, and now we must vote for the good. So my friends, let us all vote for the good that will continue the progress made for all Americans, the good that will protect the woman's right to make her own decisions, the good that will continue to fight for a cleaner planet and environment, the good that will stand up for our alliances and against foreign aggression, the good that will continue to move us forward towards curbing our nation's gun violence epidemic, and the good that will uphold our institutions, keep our republic, and stand for good character. Let us all vote for that good. So let's get to the polls and vote for that good America. Get out there and go vote. Thank you.